Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Second Earth Alternative. This is Felipe Osorio. So I got a terrific show today. Now, just before we start, if you start hearing some construction noises, just try to ignore it. I'm trying to ignore it. It's something that's going to be happening around my home. So if you hear construction noise, it is what it is. So, anyways, so today I want to talk about TR3B. Now, if you don't know what this is, well, I don't know if anybody really knows 100% what it is. Some people think it could be some secret alien technology. Some people think it could be from our governments. Some people think it could come from NASA itself. But what I wanted to do is analyze some of the images that are out there to see if we can break down any more further detail to hone down on what this UFO really is. Now, these black triangular UFOs, as it's being labeled here on Wikipedia, these were first spotted most famously by the Belgium Air Force in, I believe it was 1989 to 1992. They started having a spur of sightings. Declassified research subject to a Freedom of Information request from the UK Ministry of Defence report unidentified aerial phenomenon in the UK Air Defence region, codenamed Project Condign. In release to the public in 2006, their researchers conclude the majority, if not all, of the hitherto unexplained reports may well be due to atmospheric gaseous electrically charged buoyant plasmas. Shit. Sorry, got a little bit of cough. Which emit charged fields with the capability of inducing vivid hallucinations and psychological effects in witnesses, and are capable of being transported at enormous speeds under the influence and balance of electrically charged in the atmosphere. Wow, I think the Ministry of Defense just wrote the sequel of The Blob. I think Stephen King would be very proud of this conclusion of such a imaginative conjuring that they've been able to create with this. Okay, so sarcasm aside, okay, obviously I think this is bullshit. UFOs have not just been confirmed by I don't know how many different sources by now. We're not even talking about presidents. We're talking about now former Pentagon officials. We're talking about former fighter pilots, etc. So we know that UFOs exist. So the question is, are they extraterrestrial, or is this extraterrestrial idea something that has been imposed on humanity as a way to create a disinformation campaign against top secret aeronautical technologies? Now, if you've been following the show, you know that there are all kinds of other strange evidence, such as the Dogon people knowing that there's 3 stars in the Sirius star system decades before NASA could ever figure out. The idea that, the Anunnaki from the Sumerian texts were said to be sky gods, but the Hopi Indians had the word for ants called Anu and a word for friend called Naki, which meant that in their translation, ant friend was Anunnaki, which was really strange because they had underground caves that seemed to indicate that these Hopi people were helped by civilization with technologies or with knowledge of how to dig through channels or caves, probably something that the Hopi people weren't doing on a regular basis, to shelter away from cataclysm, something that was also mirrored in Zoroastrian texts. So this is just a small piece of the pie of why we believe these crafts that we see so often in the skies are not UFOs of the military type, but are UFOs of the exotic technology. I come from some other planet, dimension, space, time, whatever you want to call it, not from Earth, inspired technology. Now, what I found so interesting about the Bob Lazar interview is that in a sense, it kind of hit a threshold for this zeitgeist that was happening with society, that finally people weren't able to just turn their backs and be like, oh, this is all crap. We're talking about a physicist who seemed to be very honest, very sincere in a show with one of the most famous podcast hosts the world has ever seen, a show that was, I think right now, it must have at least 6 million views. Now we're talking about somebody retelling a story of back engineering spacecrafts. So if this is true, you have to consider how much other things are we being fed to the society that would then, just by logical deduction, have to be false. So this is huge. And I think people are still kind of in this awakening state, this half shock type state, like as if everything hasn't quite sunken in. Now, there was a video that came out on the internet. I've seen this man before. I've seen his content before, but it wasn't until a viewer pointed out that somebody had analyzed Bob Lazar's body language that I came across this video. But this particular YouTuber by the name of Derek Van Schaik, he basically analyzed Bob Lazar. I mean, he analyzed the entire 4-hour interview and broke it down pretty comprehensively, why he believes that based on all the signs, all the potential tells that Bob Lazar could have done in this interview, that there's a better chance that there are aliens roaming in Earth than there would be for this man to be lying. So definitely I'd recommend that video. It was pretty eye-opening to see, because I already believed in Bob Lazar, but to have somebody who was trained to do lie detection, to actually analyze Bob Lazar and mention him to be one of the least deceptive people that he seems to have seen lately, and given how extraordinary the story is, it's really something that, if you're looking for the truth, you know, this is good stuff to consider. This is good material to go over, because we're talking about some of the deepest questions that humanity has asked. We're talking about things that were asked since Aristotle time that can now be verified or answered in so many different ways. So I definitely recommend this video. Going back to TR3B. Now, lately we did an episode on Navy UFOs. The whole episode was how in 2016 the Navy had patented a technology that seems indicative of something you would associate with UFOs of the extraterrestrial variety, something that is an exotic technology that we are not currently familiar with. Now, to my surprise, upon studying more about this TR3B, which some thought was a time travel vehicle, others just think it's an anti-gravity vehicle, this particular vehicle actually has a patent. I kid you not. So we're going to go over the patent in a second, but first of all, let's go ahead and start off with some of the images that we have. So I believe this first image was captured in England, and you know, it's kind of small. It's not easy to see any kind of general structure. So we did our best to analyze this particular image. So I went ahead and I did the typical processes that I do with some of these images and trying to increase its size and see if there's any extra details. Upon cropping it and then increasing the size, look at this. Now, what fascinates me is that when you go back over here, you see this tiny little thing, and there's almost no detail there. You know, it looks like it could just be easily photoshopped. However, when you get up here and you start looking at the details with the image size, you definitely notice that there seems to be more structure. You can see linear type patterns. And let me just show you the end result that we got over here. That is our end result. And I found it fascinating because without even doing anything extra, what you can start seeing is that around the lit area, there seems to be some kind of structure underneath, as if it's not just a hole in the hull of a craft, but we're talking about like something that might be protruding outwardly. Okay, so just keep this in mind. Of course, these images are all speculation. There's no way for me to prove that these images are indeed real, but I wanted to just keep going here and see if there's any similarities with these potential fakes or potential real images. The next image is probably the one that is least like any of the other ones, because usually what ended up happening is when I studied these lights, what I noticed is that when I would put a channel filter with these triangular lights, and this one was captured in Oakland, by the way, usually what I would get is some kind of structure underneath. Now, I don't know if this is just a downright fake, or if it's just something that's different, or if the camera just didn't have the ability to pick up enough black pixels. But upon analyzing it, no matter how I change the channel mixer, it just doesn't seem to have any kind of structure underneath. It's as if the pixelation that's happening in between the lights is no different than the pixelation that's happening outside in general. So I can kind of just scan it through here. You can see no matter how we change that, you just get these open gaps. So I don't know what this is. I don't think it's a TR3B. I think it could be just 3 random lights. It could be a reflection from our car window. I don't know. Okay, so moving on, we do have other ones. Now that one was from Oakland, California. And this one is also from Oakland, California. Now, I'm not sure if it's the same events. I wasn't able to get the exact date of both images, but this one in particular, I did find it interesting because once again, once you apply the channel mixer, you start getting structure underneath, as you can see. And not just any structure. What I'm starting to notice with all these images is that where you would think there should be a light, there seems to be an casing around the light, as if the light is protruding out of the craft. Let's see if we can go further with this. Now, let me see what happens if I just crop this and increase the size. Now I'm curious to see, because I feel like there's a circle in the middle. It's very hard to see when it's this small, so I'm going to let the artificial intelligence program take care of the rest here. So let's go ahead and do image size to 2000. Why not? Blast the crap out of this one. Get more detail in there. Okay. So that's where we get, guys. To me, looks like a lot of structure in there. Now, what I feel like I keep seeing over and over again, and tell me if you're seeing the same thing, is something like almost like circular in the middle. Do you kind of see that right over here? So let's just move on. So this next one was taken in Russia. And if we apply our typical filters, what actually got me really excited about this image is, let's go ahead and just kind of get to the end over here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Look at this. So upon applying all these filters, not do we just see structure, but we see a very interesting, remember how I told you that the light looks as if it's protruding out of the craft? Look at this banding of light and darkness that's happening around. It's like a three-dimensional type of bending. Let's see if we can get more expression out of that. So I'm going to just add an extra filter just so you guys can see the bending a little bit better. So here, in trying to analyze the details, we do see a very interesting banding. And, you know, once again, I'm seeing a little bit of green in the middle that I'm not certain whether it's another type of port or another circular port that's in the middle. It certainly looks interesting to me. And let me show you a few other versions. Here's one. There's another one. Now this one's kind of cool because it was caught in daylight. The only problem is this one has already been enhanced, so it's going to be hard to capture any extra detail from this, but we're going to do our best. So after putting nothing but general filters, this is what we got in the end. You guys can make up your own conclusions whether you think this is anything interesting. Now, I did think that there seemed to be what looked like circular portals over here. Now, as you can see how rough the detail is, it's very hard to make any definitive conclusions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it at that. I think it looks kind of interesting. One of the last ones that we have here is one from Puerto Rico, out of all places. And let me show you what we got here. Now, I'll be honest, this one kind of caught my attention because when you look at this image, right, you're not seeing anything but blackness. Except when you put the channel mixer, look at that. Interesting. And as you can see, it seems that whatever this T3RB, if this is a legitimate image, it's not just three lights. It seems to have side portal lights as well, and it seems to have some kind of central circular thing. Can we increase the contrast of that? Let me see. So there you go. I mean, that's probably as good as we're gonna get it. I can try to decrease the noise around this area. So there you have it. Look, given that that image came out of a newspaper, given that it looked straight black, you know, upon doing you know, a basic Photoshop analysis and then seeing structure underneath, you know, it looks like an object. You know, what can I say other than too many, I guess, an unidentified flying object. Now, you might be very familiar with this particular image. This is one of the images that was floated around the internet after the Belgium sightings. Now, I'm not sure if this image actually came from the Belgium government itself, but I did think that upon analyzing it, that it was, once again, kind of interesting. Now, what I did like about this image is that you start seeing this kind of triangular structure underneath, but it does look like there is a thickness to this, as if like the lights are encased, some kind of like protruding bulge. I don't know how else to describe it. A light socket kind of molding. And look, do you see how you see the light and then you see this kind of like orange ambient light as if there's some structure around it? This I'm also seeing with a lot of the other images. For example, if I were to just quickly merge these and do a quick channel mixer, what starts happening is when we lower the channels, you see that? You see how you got the light, but then you got something that seems to be encasing around the light that you can visibly see as you alter the channels. So another famous image that you might have seen is this one. I'll be honest with you, it looks very cool. But this little shadow to me right away tells me that there's something not right about this. When you look at the shadows, you see how the shadows, how thick they are, how strong they are, even for something like a very thin blade of a helicopter. Why are we not seeing that over here? You know, they could be trying to play as if there's some kind of like stealth shadow type effect, as if this property of the object itself can bend light in a strange way. But you know, and I will give it to them that when you do some analysis, it looks pretty good. Like, it looks like a very well done CG, I would say. But unfortunately, that's what it is. It's just a CG, and here's why. So not every image that you see about TR3B are going to be legitimate. I just found it interesting when you see images where it seems like it's complete blackness, but upon analyzing it further, you see other structures. And those images interest me because when you see that image initially and it's completely black, who's going to post that as a hoaxer? Who's actually trying to make an image imperceptible to the average person, but perceptible to somebody who has higher knowledge? It almost doesn't make sense in a way. You think it'd be the opposite, that they would try to hoax an image that looks more appealing to the average person. Just wanted to put that out there. But here's the thing. There's an individual that we reported on called Bob Lazar that has now gone to a podcast to tunes of 5 million people, has passed a lie detector test over 4 or 5 times, and has just been analyzed by somebody who makes it a profession to analyze people for deception, and seem to know no deception at all. In fact, seem to indicate that there's a higher chance of aliens existing than this person lying. So if Bob Lazar is telling the truth, then certainly there are crafts that are being back engineered. And if that patent about that Navy UFO that we highlighted on this channel is real, then certainly seeing a patent for a vehicle that looks like a T3RB, or what we think to look like a T3RB, that makes you wonder if some of these images could be real. So I know that images are easily faked nowadays, but that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about whether those images are credible or not. We're talking about whether the story is credible. And if the story is credible, and if it does hold water, then certainly some of these anomalous images could have a higher probability of potentially being real. Hence, we go back to the T3RB patent. And I'm not kidding. This is an actual patent. I went over it. They go through some very complicated mathematics, at least for the layman person, in trying to conclude that at this perfect 60-degree angle, there is an interesting interaction between the electromagnetic field that is created in the hull of the craft, parabolic type way, so they probably have some kind of a U-looking wire that goes through the hole, and the electrically plated copper plates that exist in the corner of this craft, 2 of them which are negatively charged, 1 of them that's positively charged. So the edges, the reason why this T3RB craft looks thick is because according to this patent, the edges are lined with vertical antennas that creates its own electromagnetic field that seems to be perpendicular to the electrical magnetic field that is created at the hull of the craft with the U-shaped type of wiring, a thick insulating wiring that goes around the craft. Now, what is really important about this is there seems to be a common variable between this patent and the other patent from the Navy UFO. And a common variable is electromagnetic fields that seem to be in opposition to each other, that seems to be creating the time-space curvature that is allowing these objects to create anti-gravity properties. For example, the Navy UFO episode, if you caught that one, it was all about how the electromagnetic field was being developed on top of each other, because upon electrifying an initial field, another field was able to be started through acoustic properties, through these chambers that had gases that could be electrically excited by noise, essentially, which was probably necessary to be able to penetrate through the first electromagnetic field. So once again, what I'm seeing here is the interaction of perpendicular electromagnetic fields through a certain 60-degree phasing seems to create the propulsion that they're looking for in a craft. What I found also really interesting, I don't know how many people picked up on this, but they were talking about that the sides of the craft were plated in copper. And you have to wonder why copper plating? Well, it could be because of the electroconductivity of copper, which is very electroconductive. But something that I thought was kind of interesting is if you ever looked at these makeshift models for hoverboards, well, what they do is they essentially spin a magnet over copper. That's how you can get something that's close to a Back to the Future hoverboard. So I thought that was all really interesting details. I want to share that with you guys. And just want to leave you guys off with one last image. I know I showed you guys that fake image that was CG'd, but I want to show you something that I was just discussing, which always interests me, which are images that at first look to be completely black, as if there's nothing to see there, but upon further analysis, you get something that looks like this. And very cool, guys. As you can see, the channel mixing allows us to see these lighted structures. So the light is not just some random ambient circular light. It is literally being reflected against some kind of surface, thus creating linear patterns upon the image that initially is not able to be seen just when completely blacked out. So that is our episode for today. If you guys have any ideas or any concepts that you wanted me to do for the episode, please go ahead and share. I cut out the remote viewing section for this episode because, frankly, it's just kind of hard to keep up with the remote viewing and to keep up with the UFO news all at once. I feel like they should be possibly 2 different episodes. But what do you guys think? Do you guys want the remote viewing section? Do you guys not want it? Or do you guys think it should be in a different show? I'm going to go ahead and leave that question as a poll for you guys to try to help me out to try to better the show for the future. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. This is Felipe Osorio, signing out.